Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark, brought to you by Advancing Analytics, your friendly data engineering and AI consultancy. Isn't it a lovely day to talk about some Databricks news? I mean, I say that, it's a horrible day outside, but still, we can still talk about Databricks news from both October and November 2024 to kind of catch up with what's going on in the world of Databricks. Now, before we go on to that, we have just had our very first online conference ran by Advancing Analytics called Advancing Innovation Online. We normally do an in-person conference once a year in London, but obviously not everyone lives in London. Not everyone can make it to that in-person event. So we thought we'd film some of the sessions and put it out. And that went out yesterday. I'm going to drop a link down below and put a card somewhere so you can go and check out the recording from that. That is around on our channel as a live stream. So if you didn't manage to make it, you can still go check it out. Hear from me about the future of the industry, where we think we're going, generally what we think we should be doing in the next few years. If that sounds interesting, go and check that out in a minute. As always, if you are new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know down in the comments which of these features you've been waiting for, anything new here, any of these ones you wanted to go and drop off and do a separate video about. Just say hello, that's fine. And then, yeah, without further ado, let's go have a look. Right, here I am on the Microsoft Azure flavor of the Databricks release notes. So if you go on the release notes, you've got different flavors for each of the different cloud hyperscalers. Go and have a look at the relevant one where you are working. They are very similar, but there is a little bit of nuance. Not everything is always released at the same time, and there might be things coming in to do with integration with your particular cloud. So we've got October, we've got November, we've got two separate pages. We're going to whip through and have a look at what's gone on. Going to whip down to the bottom to get started. Ooh, that's the plan. Come on, there we go. Right, I will just step through. Now, some of them I'll just breeze past, some of them will take a minute to talk about, and we'll see how it goes. So, serverless is being rolled out everywhere. So there's 4 new regions that have now got serverless that didn't previously be able to use it. Again, now they're doing a slightly better one in that they're also supporting private connectivity when they roll it out. But do go and check and make sure that everything is supported. And that's just a relentless rollout. We're seeing it rolled out across more and more places. Salesforce ingestion connection has been simplified. Now, that might not mean anything. You might go, what Salesforce ingestion connector? That is all to do with the new Lakeflow Connect preview. So this whole Lakeflow Connect was announced back at the Data AI Summit in June. That is essentially the new Databricks way of going and getting data and pulling it into your lake. It's currently a gated private preview. So if you have no idea what this is about, you don't have access yet. So we'll see it coming into public preview at some point when everyone will be able to use it. It's ungated public preview. And then essentially there's a whole workflow about how you go, hey, Salesforce, I want these tables. Just automatically pull that down into essentially a volume so you can then start loading from it or into Delta tables. Lots of stuff inside there. We won't go into it because unless you're on the gated preview, probably doesn't really make sense for you yet. Cool. All right. Other bits and pieces. If you're doing like a pip install and you're kind of installing, updating parts of your Python environment, and you're using auto reload, it was kind of slightly painful and it went and just reloaded absolutely everything. It's now going to try and do a targeted reload of only what's changed. Makes sense. If you're doing that heavily in a lot of your notebooks, you'll save some time. We saw the public preview of Databricks apps. Now, I did do a video recently looking at what they look like when it was first announced. So if you want to have more detail about that, go and have a look. Essentially, if you're trying to do a lightweight Python UI website type thing, you can do that. You can host it inside Databricks now rather than need to build integrations elsewhere in the cloud. So make things a little bit easier. Mosaic AI Model 7 now supports batch LLMs. Essentially, the AI query, that is the SQL function you can use to kind of just say, hey, go and for each row in this particular table of data, in my data frame, go and just run essentially a whole ChatGPT style prompt for each one. You can now do that via custom served models. You can do it via foundation models. Bunch of stuff you can do if you're just trying to do big inference over lots of stuff. There's a new Databricks Runtime. We'll get to that at the end because that has now gone GA, no longer in beta. Comments and notebooks have gotten a little bit better. That's if you're in a Word doc and you leave comments so someone else can go and see your comments on it, you can do the same thing in notebooks and they've got slightly nicer to use, slightly easier to find. It's getting better. Filters on notebooks now persist. So if you're in a notebook and there's an output data table at the bottom of a cell and you filtered it, like that wouldn't persist as you went away and reopened it. That was just kind of a user experience while you're looking at it. You can now essentially persist. So if you go in and you filter a lot of stuff, go away, come back to that same notebook, those filters will still be in place. The Databricks Assistant autocomplete is now GA, and honestly, that has gotten so much better. And it's to a frustrating point, it's so much better. I've been running lots of training recently. Whenever I'm training a group of people, I normally show them how not to write things. Or I'll start typing something and they'll be like, right, how do you think I finished this particular thing? And obviously behind me, autocomplete's already gone and finished it. It's corrected my errors. It's on to the next part. And it's, yeah, it's getting a lot better than it used to be. It's actually getting very, very good. Going ahead of context, looking at the rest of your notebook and going, oh, well, they're probably going to want to do a data table over that thing they mentioned. Let's just fill that out for them. It's, yeah, pretty good. Serverless is automatically going to be enabled on eligible accounts. So previously you'd have to go and switch it on. But now if you've got a premium workspace, it's going to be enabled for serverless if it is in the right place. As long as it's in a region that supports it, as long as it's eligible and as long as it's on premium, then serverless is going to be enabled. If you desperately don't want it to be serverless, you need to go and turn that off at the account level. We've got budget policies. So budget policies came out fairly recently, so you can then just assign budgets and you can kind of say, this is what you're allowed to use. So you can go and do that against serverless usage, and you can just actually have a track about who's spending what money, which becomes really important with serverless because you don't have as much fine-grained control over this cluster of this size and this many boxes. So you need to make sure you've actually got a handle on how much you're spending and what you're spending it on, and are your costs going down because things are happening faster, which is the direction you want things to be going in. AI functions have been pushed out further into North Europe and West Europe, which makes me happy because we didn't have any AI functions in Europe, and that made me sad. So that is all things that are a bit like the AI query, but also AI classify, AI extract, AI generate, a load of pre-canned prompts where we have like regular kind of ETL tasks, regular data transformation tasks that you want to be Gen AI powered. You can just call a SQL function and it already has a load of prompt context. So rather than you having to write out and script out this big prompt telling it how to extract a person's name from a big lump of text, you can just call AI extract. And we did a video about that recently, so there is more details. Now available in Europe, which is cool. Okay, fine-grained compute. So previously, if you're trying to access Unity Catalog and you wanted things like row-level security, you want to abstracted security using views, you want to have dynamic views that is checking your roles, all that kind of stuff, all the things they actually list there. You couldn't do that on a single user compute. It just didn't quite work. Now, weirdly, it's going to be passing it to serverless to do that compute. So there'll be an extra cost on top of your serverless compute, I assume. But yeah, interesting details in there. I've not dug into exactly how that's going to work, but makes it slightly more flexible without you having to plump for a proper full cluster if that's the way you're running your architectures. Structured outputs are now available, so you can say, this is the JSON schema I want you to give me my output in. So if you're trying to do like integrations, you're trying to do things that are expecting a very fixed structure for the outputs, you can now actually sort of do a little bit of enforcement to make it act like a proper AI. You can now do that. It's in preview. Unity Catalog, you can specify a default metastore for a region. So if a new workspace is created in that region, it'll automatically have that metastore assigned rather than it have to be this whole process of deploy a workspace, go talk to your Unity Cat administrator, ask them if they can then add that metastore to that workspace. They can just default it. So people can be a little bit more empowered. They can spin up workspaces. They can trash them, spin up workspaces. If that's the way you are working, you can do it a little bit more nice now. The Llama 2 70 billion chat model is now being retired. Again, because there's other models coming out, and so there's a recommended replacement. If you currently have that integrated, you should be switching and keeping the model up to date as things change. There's an old runtime that's gone out of support. If you're using 15.1, you should be on a newer one now. Databricks Assistant can now optimize your SQL queries. So not like the autocomplete where you're typing it and it's going to be updating it. You've now got the /optimize. There's a bunch of those things in Databricks Assistant where you can go /fix, /optimize, /explain, and you can tell it, essentially that is a shortcut prompt. So you can say, well, /optimize, and it will have a look at your query and go, oh, actually, you want to write it this way instead, rather than running your query and then finding out it's terrible afterwards. Kind of like, just getting another developer to take a peek at your query and go, oh, no, yeah, that's not going to be efficient. Why do you write it this way? That's what it's now doing. I've not put it through pages yet. It'd be really interesting to get some really gnarly, nasty SQL queries and go, there you go, Databricks Assistant /optimize, see what you can do with that. And then finally, cost attribution of fine-grained access control. So that whole thing of saying single access compute is going to use a little bit of serverless, that's now actually going to be properly tagged into our billing. So 2 of those previous announcements, the whole budgeting and cost management of serverless, plus the use of fine-grained access control with single nodes, bringing together so we can actually report on it and we can go and see how that's working. We can go and make sure it's being budgeted and paid for properly. So that was October. Loads of stuff happening in October. Some nice things we've got pulling out there. I've switched over to November. Again, we'll go down to the bottom so we can do it as they released. Again, 14.2 runtime support ended. That's fine. Private connectivity from serverless compute for model serving. So again, kind of when we had serverless, and essentially kind of basically anyone who before they used serverless, if you're using Databricks workspaces and Lake, you'd nearly always have it networked. Certainly the companies that we work for in Azure, lots of financial services, lots of people with protected sensitive data, don't put it there without a network. So when serverless came along, people were like, well, I still want it to be secure. Even if the actual compute is happening in the Databricks control plane, I still want that to be a secure connection. That's what Private Link is doing in this case. It's doing the link from your data in your own Azure tenant or AWS tenant to the Databricks compute in the same region, but on their tenants. Private Link makes sure that's secure. So we're just ticking off saying, well, if we're doing model serving, we also want that to be supported by Private Link. So that is great in terms of like finishing that story of making sure things are still secure, still in a bounded network, even if we're using serverless. There's some additional things. So if you're in the UK, Cyber Essentials is a security certification process to go, yes, we do actually look after data properly. We look after our documents, our internal network and things are secure. Cyber Essentials Plus is an extended version of that that does some extra stuff. So they've actually now got some controls to help you actually make sure if you're using Databricks in the UK, that everything is compliant and it ticks off and just help you pass Cyber Essentials Plus if you are going through that process in the UK. Can use Unity Cats to govern access to external cloud services. So service credentials is a thing that's kind of being pushed out through lots of Databricks things, where essentially it's the ability to build other managed entities. So the ability to use those credentials to access other things within the same tenant. So essentially setting up access from within Databricks to other Azure services using those managed identities. That's currently in preview. We're starting to see that come out. So the service credentials, we'll see more and more things start using service credentials, I assume. Foundational model API paper token is now available in all model serving supported regions. So there's the whole idea of foundational models is a load of those things where it's essentially off the shelf existing models. So if I want to go and use OpenAI, or want to use Llama, or want to use Mistral, DBRX, all these existing large language models, essentially they get added into your Databricks workspace as essentially, they look like model serving endpoints that you've spun up yourself, but actually you're passing it through to a third-party service and paying per token. Now they weren't available absolutely everywhere. They were so there were some places you could do model serving, but you couldn't. They didn't have that foundational model paper token workloads. They've now been extended so you can do it in every places. Now, if you're not in a US or EU region, if model serving isn't currently supported in your region and you don't have those foundational model APIs, you need to cross geo data processing. Essentially, you need to take a button saying it's okay if this data leaves my cloud environment, goes to another environment, gets processed and gets pulled back. That's a choice you can do, but essentially goes via the US. So be a little careful of that. If you don't want your data being routed by the US and you're building out egress, you're building out, network costs, all that kind of stuff you need to be aware of. Main thing is, for me, EU regions can now do foundational models, which is great. That is super useful. Lots of those AI functions and things that were coming in are really, really powerful if you have those foundational models available. Data processing is better at quick fixing. So it's just slightly better at finding errors and seeing what the errors are and actually being able to do it. And it's already pretty good. So that is good. I hadn't even seen that. Read-only code blocks now available in the Code Explorer. So you can actually start to actually plug these things in. I'm going to have a look at what that actually is and how that fits in. Predictive optimization is now enabled by default for new Azure Databricks accounts. So predictive optimization is where if you have a managed table inside a Unity catalog and you're inserting data to it, it's automatically going to be doing some maintenance on it. It's automatically going to be running optimized jobs for you behind the scenes using the maintenance serverless type of cluster that kind of is just hidden away, sorting your tables out. So you used to have to specifically enable it. That is now turned on by default for Unity Catalog managed tables whenever you deploy a new workspace. So pretty good, going to help a lot of things. But if you've got your own maintenance tasks that are running and you've got predictive optimization turned on, you're essentially doing the work twice. So just make sure you're not actually doing that. Bit of a change. Hosted RStudio is now end of life. So if you're using the Databricks hosted RStudio, you won't be able to use that anymore. You need to go and actually have an alternative, use a different version, or use a non-Databricks hosted version. I seem to be looking at that. Part of that is to do with Databricks Runtime 16.0, which we'll have a look at in a second. Clean Rooms has gone ungated, which is pretty huge. So Databricks Clean Rooms was first talked about a year and a half ago at the Data AI Summit 2023. And they talked about this thing, and it sounded great. And then we didn't hear anything for a full year. And then they teased it again at the Data AI Summit 2024. But it's like, but where is it? Well, now it is finally ungated public preview. So anyone can just go and have a look at it now. So Clean Rooms is this whole idea of saying, I want to set up basically a no man's land, a DMZ kind of area between two parties to be able to share their data without each other seeing that data. So if I had two entirely different companies, two retail companies, both wanted to build a personalization process looking at shopping baskets and how people bought different products, but they don't want each other to actually see that data. I don't want that company to see like my data, but actually collaboratively they want to build an AI model that both can use. Clean Rooms can do it. If I've got like a trading company and I've got an insurance company, they're not allowed to share data. That's against regulatory things, but creating an AI model that actually uses that data is perfectly fine. Lots of use cases like that, where the two companies cannot see the data from the other side. Clean Rooms act as this place where they can both submit their data. They can run a pre-approved notebook. They can take the output and decide who gets the output, but they cannot see each other's data. And if those are scenarios that you're looking at, that is what Clean Rooms is. You can now go and have a play with it. And now that it's ungated, we can probably set up a bit of a demo and do a video and have a look at it. So we'll add that to the list of things to look at soon. Cross-platform view sharing. So you can now share views across lots of different things. So you can switch things around, and it's slightly awkward to try and share them. Not had a look at how Delta sharing, open sharing views work, but yeah, it's certainly interesting. It's one of them been tricky to try and actually share that kind of stuff. You got the warehouses system table. So that is to do with the SQL warehouse like instances. So any events that are changing. So it's not to do with the queries, not to do with how people are using the warehouse. That all exists elsewhere. But this is to do with, I had a warehouse. I changed the auto scaling. I switched it from pro to serverless. Any events that are someone creating a new warehouse, deleting warehouses, etc., are now available in that system compute warehouses table. Just so you got full auditing view. You can see people doing it on clusters. You can now see people doing it on warehouses as well. Private connectivity support for everything across jobs, notebooks, and Delta live tables. Again, this is serverless, just being able to connect to everything through private link, just to make sure everything is fully plumbed in. That was the other part of the picture we saw earlier with model serving, just to make sure everything is fully networked up, which is good. And again, being able to then do that so it can get to Azure managed resources that are within a managed endpoint. Again, it's just completing that picture of making sure serverless plumbs into everything. And it's not you have to give up, you have to make sacrifices in security of using serverless, because that's no good and people wouldn't do that. SQLDF. SQLDF is if you run, if you do percentage SQL and you write some SQL and it has an output in a notebook cell, I think that came in a little while ago, is it automatically made a data frame for you. Rather than you have to get up and go, oh, that's interesting, and then redo it as a data frame equals spark.sql. It just automatically just sets that into a _SQL df. But you can now just reuse it in downstream SQL cells. So actually, you've kind of got it elsewhere that you can then use and build on. It's going to be interesting. Kind of curious how that works. We don't use that much, because if you have several SQL cells, essentially it overwrites. Oh, now SQLDF is the result of that cell. Oh no, now here SQLDF is the result of that cell. Kind of curious to see how that actually builds up and how you can do the reusability across. We'll have a look. Mosaic AI model training has seen a couple of things changing around. Like, you used to have Mosaic AI model training when you're doing fine-tuning of models. That's now just called foundational model fine-tuning. Just a little bit of a rebrand. Some things have slightly been renamed. AutoML is now just part of experiments. So if you're going in Databricks expecting to see certain things within the ML sort of stuff, just they've shifted around, they've had a rename, it's all good. We can now go and have a look at query performance and the query history on DLT. So all of the good stuff they've done recently in terms of putting out what was originally just Databricks SQL query history. Now we saw it go into the general notebooks. Now we're seeing it go into DLT as well, just so you've got a better view of all the queries around how it works, all that kind of good stuff. The web terminal's got a little bit fancier. So you got now config files, you can cycle through things. It's just a little bit easier to use if you're using a web terminal to do some stuff. Python debugger is even better and works with serverless now. It didn't quite work if you're trying to do the step through cell. That kind of stuff only worked if you had a physical cluster, not a serverless cluster. And now it's made it run with serverless. Again, serverless just getting compatibility in all of those different places. Final piece is automatic cluster updates and enhanced security. So this is essentially, I originally thought this is changing the Databricks runtime. I don't think it is. I can't find anything that says that's changing the runtime for you. But essentially, if you had a Databricks cluster that had been spun up for quite some time, if you're doing streaming and you hadn't restarted the server for months, well, then it might be that the host OS has kind of missed some vital security patches. And now this is putting in a maintenance window to automatically bump and restart the cluster at certain windows in a maintenance window, just to make sure it has all the latest security updates, the quick fixes, the hot patches, all that kind of good stuff on the underlying host OS and all of that. So lots of good stuff in there. Don't think it's doing DBR yet. I need to dig in and just make sure that's not the case. People need to get used to the fact that runtime's going to start upgrading if they're on serverless. Serverless doesn't have a runtime, so you kind of need to be aware of what is available at serverless at any point, but not the case, as far as I know, with the automatic cluster updates yet. We'll see. Cool. So, bunch of stuff on there. How are we doing for time? We can have a step into the DBR. So, there is a new runtime that was released as part of all these updates. We saw it go into beta, and then we saw it go GA. That is Databricks Runtime 16.0. Can't believe we're up to 16. Time is insane. There's a few things that go on in here. So, there are some breaking changes as part of this release. Thankfully, it only affects people on Java, so sorry. Let's have a look. So one big change in the underlying Java development kit. So they've gone from 8.0 to 17. I imagine this is a change they've been knowing they have got to make for a long time, and have just made a very big change. So that does mean if you're running Java code, it has to be compatible with JDK 17. You're running Scala and you've got any custom things in there, that needs to be compatible. Any libraries have to be compatible. So if you have a load of old Java jobs that have been running in the background and the person's left and no one knows how it works, be a little bit careful, because that actually is going to be a breaking change for a fair few people who are using Java or Scala-based programs. So have a look at that. You can go and see what's going on there. There might be some changes you need to make to actually refactor that and have that to be able to lift up to 16.0. Or Studio is also going away as part of that release, as we mentioned that in the platform notes. Part of the Databricks runtime that is not going to be supported. Certain types for type widening have kind of been disabled. So moving things to, again, to make sure Delta and Iceberg actually work the same way, to try and just make everything is compatible. They've basically disabled type widening for certain things being moved to a decimal and certain things being made to a double. That is no longer possible. So have a check of that out and be careful you've got that in your scripts. Regex pattern used to have negation. Used to be able to be fairly lazy with negation, but you had to then actually change it around. So that is actually now, basically, it's supported properly if you've got negation in there. It didn't, kinda. Duplicate matching. So if you had a merge, so if you had a merge into a delta table, and then you had your join constraint at the top, and then you've got your various different match conditions. If your join matched and multiple records matched, so I had 2 incoming records, 2 changed records with the ID of, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3 already exists, I'd get an error. Because, well, I don't know which of those you're trying to apply, so I'm not going to do it. Even if in my merge conditions, actually they only met one of the conditions. So my merge conditions, I can say, well, where the flag is this, well, then merge there. If the flag is this, use that. And I could actually have the logic to manage those duplicates, but it didn't let me get there. The moment it found multiple matching things, it would throw an error and say, you can't do that. Now, they've added some change, so actually the merge conditions are respected. So if multiple rows still match the same when matched condition, it's still going to throw an error. But if you actually handled it, I think the most common scenario for this is when you receive change data style things. So if you had someone update a record and do a delete, or you did a delete and then an upsert, you'd get multiple records with those different changes. And they say, well, if it's D, well, that's a delete, then you can go down the delete path. If it's an update, go down this path, and you can kind of manage it. Slowly changing. If someone's trying to update the existing record to set the end date, then insert the new record, but they've got the same key, well, I wouldn't be able to do that previously. I can now do that. So just change in behavior of that kind of stuff. You can't now hack and change the certain Spark cluster configurations when you're doing it, which is fine. There was a 2-hour default timeout if you were trying to install libraries, and it just hung and took a long time. Yeah, if it takes more than 2 hours to spin up a thing, that's going to fail. I think that's probably okay. If it was taking longer than that, then there's probably something wrong with how you're doing things. Installing libraries from DBFS and setting config, now disabled. Again, lots of slight behavior things, lots of old hacks that we used to do. Shouldn't really need to do anymore, but used to be able to do. And you got the add artifact type. So if you're trying to actually add in dependencies, trying to make single user compute work in the same way as other stuff, so you can kind of just make things work. So yeah, generally more to do with like the DevOpsy library management kind of things, but a bunch of just like changes of behavior in terms of how your clusters are going to work, just how things work. Essentially a little bit of a standardization from 6.0 to go, right, okay, we need to level the playing field between serverless and other things. We need to level the playing field between Iceberg and Delta. You need to just get a bit of consistency. And that does mean taking away some features that you could previously do. But hopefully none of them are big major breaking ones, unless you're writing Java. Cool. We mentioned auto reload, about that's changing to be a little bit faster. Avro support has changed. So if you've got like some recursive schemas in there, so if you have nested things with a nested, you can now set a maximum depth, maximum depth, maximum depth, so you can go a little bit further into it. Expanded support for Confluent schema registry. Again, more Avro support. If you're pulling lots of things in, you can do a bit more of that. Forced reclustering in liquid clustering. So previously you ran an optimize on a liquid clustered table, and it might change how it's clustering because of skew and what it's noticed in the behavior of the clustering columns, but it wouldn't go back and reorganize anything that had been written previously. It assumes this is evolving as new data comes in. It'll change its behavior of clustering. Whereas if you want to go, well, actually, no, I want you to go and rewrite everything based on what we know now, well, you can now use optimize full. This is a new optimize full command, so you can physically tell it, go and optimize the whole table again, because honestly, the shape of data has changed, and I want to have a consistent layout for this. You can now go and do that. You can do identity columns in the Delta table builder. So it's annoying because you could build a Delta table using Python or Scala, and you can get everything set up, and then you'd have to add an identity column using SQL, using add table, alter table, etc. You can now use it as part of your Delta APIs, and they'll just work a little bit better, so you don't have to have two different approaches, which is great. We mentioned fine-grained asset control for single-user compute. Again, that does use serverless, so be aware of it. Liquid clustering now supported when you're just writing out, so you can do dataframe.write cluster by instead of partition by. It is, again, just telling it how to use liquid clustering, how to do that. Optimize full, we mentioned. Again, you can use that anywhere. It's fine. If you are inserting, you can use the insert statement with. I've not actually looked at that one. Oh, so essentially, just if you just got a straight blanket insert, you can add some table options when you're actually pushing it through. Be interesting to see actually what that is doing in there. What have we got in terms of width? We don't have things in terms of width. Okay, I'll have a look at that, and we'll do a little bit of a dig into how that's going to behave. Some new SQL functions. So try URL decode. It's a classic one from SQL Server land. So essentially, just if you're going to try and decode a URL to go to special characters and just standardize it, that's what URL decode does. Try essentially isn't going to error if it breaks, and using anti-standard mode, it's not going to return a null. Zero of null, null of zero. Again, just a little bit of logical changes that we can use to put some stuff in there. We can also we can tell it to use schema evolution inside our merge statement. So previously, if you were trying to use schema evolution when you're just doing a data frame.write, so data frame.write options merge schema as true is the standard Spark like append or overwrite version that could include schema evolution. If you want to do a merge, which so many people do by default with Delta, well, you had to turn on a cluster config that was enable auto merge, which you couldn't do in serverless and has some limitations around it. Well, now you've got this with schema evolution as an extra clause you can add to your merge statement to tell it, yes, you should merge. You should evolve. So if I'm trying to merge a table that's got 6 columns into a table that's got 5 columns, it'll automatically append that new column and insert data to it. That's now there if you have that with schema evolution. Final things, the Spark R is now deprecated. So if you're using Spark R and a load of stuff in there, then you can't really use that from Databricks. Well, you can't use that from Databricks 16.0, but you do have Sparkly R, which tends to be the one people use instead. So just be aware that that is there, and you'll need to migrate code over if you are switching to that newer runtime. And yeah, the final thing doesn't work in Databricks private virtual cloud. If you're using PVC, you cannot use Databricks Runtime 16.0. I'm assuming because of some of those limitations and the Java development kit and all of those kind of stuff. Cool. There's also a bunch of bug fixes, bunch of library updates, usual stuff in the Databricks runtime. But yeah, there's a big old stuff in there. You can see why it's a major version. Normally, if it was going from 15.4, 15.5, 6, 7, whatever, these are minor updates. So they include new features. They might include some bug fixes, but they're not going to break your code generally. Databricks 16.0 has a ton of underlying kind of platform and configuration changes. That is going to be a fairly major update for people who've been using Databricks for a long time. People who are fairly recently on Databricks probably won't have that much of a problem. It tends to be lots of the big, complex library deployment, management things, older methods such as compiling jars down and deploying that. That's where you're going to have issues in there. But do take a look out. There's a lot in there. Okay, so huge amount of stuff going out through October and November. Loads of things to be aware of. Again, going to be some pain for some people moving on to Databricks 16.0, but it'll get you in a much more standard, consistent state so you can keep taking advantage of new features as they come. Loads of good stuff, loads of enhancements to Databricks Assistant we talked through, loads of new features, loads of serverless just now actually being available and can be used by things. Tons of really good stuff. As always, anything that was in that list that you're like, you skimmed over that, but that's really amazing for us. Why aren't you more excited about it? Let me know. Talk down in the comments. What are you most excited about? What's got the biggest change for you? Where's the most value in all those things? It's always good for us to actually hear what people are thinking. Whenever Databricks are off doing these things, then people like us will be sitting there going, why do they do that? Who's that for? And if it's for you, it's always useful to know. Cool. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.